Like, maybe they like me, but like, I'm not good enough to, like, as soon as anyone else expresses interest, they'd have to go with that, right? Because basically anyone would be better than me. Or with non-monogamy, like my metamors are cooler, hotter, smarter than me. So maybe my partner's just with me because they were with me before. And like, if they had any choice, they wouldn't.
I definitely felt this with Dedeker upon meeting her for the first time.
See, because I felt that about you when I met you for the first time, Emily.
Well, that's fine. Then we can just like cancel it out and know that we're both cool and smart and fun and play video games well and are nerdy enough.
Welcome to the Multiamory podcast. I'm Jase.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Dedeker.
We believe in looking to the future of relationships, not maintaining the status quo of the past.
So whether you're monogamous, polyamorous, swinging, casually dating, or if you just do relationships differently, we see you and we're here for you.
On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we're talking about imposter syndrome. This phenomena is something that affects so many of us in our day-to-day lives. And it can be really difficult when you're asking yourself these questions about whether you actually are good enough for your job, good enough for your relationship, good enough for basically anything in your life. And so today we're going to be discussing all things imposter syndrome, what it is, how it can affect our relationships, and how we can learn to combat it. Hoo boy, get ready.
Yeah, folks, this is a topic near and dear to our hearts. All three of us just love fostering a little our own pet imposter syndrome complex just next to our hearts. To be totally honest,
mine's named Impy.
Impy's
the imposter
nice.
syndrome.
I like that.
Yeah.
What's yours named, Emily?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Wilbur, maybe.
That's cute.
It's the first thing that came to mind. I was going to say Fred, and I'm like, wait a minute, no, that's from the Ari Cardos episode of yesteryear. So
I think
it can't be named that.
My imposter syndrome is named something with a the attached. It's not like a traditional name. It's like the deceiver of everyone around me.
Wow.
I like that.
It's more dark and spiky. Anyway, let's be real with you folks. The three of us are right now in the middle of writing our book manuscript. We're kind of in like the last burst of getting it ready to hand over to our editor. And we're exhausted and stressed out. And also dealing with imposter syndrome on top of that, because that's super, super helpful. I'm going through a breakup right now, which brings with it its own form of imposter syndrome about, am I good at relationships? Am I a good person? I don't know. So
answer to both is yes.
Well,
your objective friend.
Sure, but the deceiver within my heart would take issue with that. So today we thought it would be helpful to, I guess, dive into this a little bit and see if we can understand it for ourselves at the very least. And maybe all y'all out there who also struggle with imposter syndrome can come along for the ride and find something useful as well.
Yeah. All right. So let's define imposter syndrome first and foremost. It is also known as the imposter phenomenon, imposterism, fraud syndrome, or the imposter experience. I love that. It's like you're going to go to
a theater piece.
Exactly. The imposter experience, like the Walking Dead experience or something. Like it's a thing that you get at Comic-Con, perhaps. So
that's good.
Yeah, exactly. It is a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their skills, talents, or accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. Yeah, that sounds about right. When do you two feel this the most? Because I gotta say, something, for instance, that happened in my life is getting to go to China and sing over there. Like, I feel very much and have felt very much like I'm an imposter getting to do that because I just kind of happened to be in the right place at the right time. It being in my caroling company, and then eventually they just picked me, and it was like, oh, well, I just kind of, elbowed my way in there somehow, and I'm just lucky to even get that opportunity.
Instead of you're a really good singer who's worked really hard for many years and had wanted that for years before getting it and finally achieved it. And wow, I did such a good job.
Yeah.
Instead, you made that story that you just told us about, I was just lucky. Wasn't me at all.
Well, I even feel like getting into the Carolyn Company at all was because you taught me the music and were able to help me with that. And I wouldn't have probably gotten in at all without you. So there's another imposter syndrome right there.
Why do you see? This is a great case study in how deep this goes, right? It's like levels
very deep
levels
on me.
of imposter syndrome.
Definitely. So how about you two?
For me, I think it shows up, in a few or maybe all areas of my life. Everything from, the obvious one is making a podcast and giving relationship advice to people and being like, oh gosh, there's somebody they're going to figure out that I don't know what the hell I'm doing and no one should listen to me and I'm terrible and everyone should hate me. So that's where we are.
You go straight to the hating.
Yeah, Jase, there's a deep vein in this mine of hatred, of everyone hates me. That's right where you go.
Yeah. That is where I go. That is where I tend to default. You're right. Because it's that thing of there's all that guilt and shame that comes with it. It's if I am really not worthy and haven't done enough or don't know enough or don't do things well enough or don't work hard enough, those are all the parts that go into the imposter syndrome. It's if those are true and yet I still succeed at something, it's hoo boy, when people figure that out, they're going to hate me. Or for me, often in my head, it's a lot of them have already figured it out, but they're maybe being polite and just not doing anything about it yet.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it's deep. It goes deep.
Yeah. Yikes.
Oh, yeah. For me, it probably shows up in the areas that are the most important to me and that I identify with the most. Being a writer, being a relationship coach, being a podcaster, that those are probably the main areas where it rears its ugly head to tell me you're not qualified enough, you don't have enough experience, you make mistakes in your regular life. So how dare you suggest that other people could do things differently or better. Yeah, exactly. So pretty much constant. I wouldn't say that it's like Jase where it's every single area of my life, but
okay, there may be a few where I feel more confident.
Yeah.
I can't think of them right now, but there's probably some.
I do find that interesting that all three of us kind of pinpointed things that really, really matter to us. That it's not these benign, random things that we're insecure about, but rather the things that really, really matter to us. And I think that that's something for people to be aware of, because unless you're just an absurdly secure human who understands and is fine with everything in their life, then I don't know, maybe that's potentially going to be an issue for you.
Well, I wonder, and maybe you get into this later in the episode, but I think that the root of where at least imposter syndrome lies for me is I have this expectation of, when I am competent and I am qualified and I am doing everything right, it's going to feel a particular way that feels good, and I won't have any doubts, and I'll just feel 100% confident. And so for as long as I have any doubt or self-questioning or a lack of confidence, no matter how small, that feels like it gets transmuted into, I must be an imposter, which seems like the trouble there is maybe in the expectation of how I expect that I would feel if I was actually successful or meant to be doing the things that I'm doing or worthy of the things that I'm doing.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that's like a broken expectation on your own internal part.
So here's some characteristics of imposter syndrome. It's estimated that nearly 70% of individuals will experience signs and symptoms of imposter phenomenon, as they're calling it here, at least once in their life.
I think that seems low. That's amazing. There's
low.
Actually 30% of people who are not going to experience this.
I'm like, who are these people?
Yeah,
what's their life like?
I know. Jeez.
I wonder if there's any difference based on generations as well. I feel like I've noticed that our generation, millennials, at least tend to be more open about imposter syndrome, if not experiencing it more frequently, but we talk about it a lot more frequently.
Well, I will say this. I spoke today to a person who's a very good friend of mine who is a boomer about imposter syndrome. And he was like, what is that? I've never heard of that before.
Well,
and I was like,
maybe we're just more aware then.
Yeah, there could be more awareness.
I explained it to him and he was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's just something that I think he's also an actor. He was like, that's just something all actors feel. And I'm like, yeah, okay. All right. But interesting that he didn't have like a definition for it. And maybe that's because, the definition didn't happen until 1978, which we'll talk about momentarily.
Gotcha. Okay. So there's a particular flavor to this where not only may you feel like my own skills or my talents or my accomplishments aren't worthy, or maybe I'm doubting them, but there can also be a sense that I am either actively or passively deceiving other people into believing that I'm more competent than I actually am. So that can be a particular flavor that some people experience. It's been recognized to affect men and women equally. We don't have data on studying people who are not in the gender binary, unfortunately, but I'm willing to bet probably just all human beings. Everybody can come to this imposter party. And the way that it's studied as a reaction to particular stimuli and to particular events. So it's not classified as a mental disorder. It's not recognized in the DSM, although in the DSM, you will find that they do recognize things like low sense of self-esteem and a sense of failure as being associated with symptoms of depression. So imposter syndrome, for calling it a syndrome, I think technically isn't classified as such, but there are a lot of overlaps of the different facets of imposter syndrome that could potentially intersect with different mental disorders or poor mental health, potentially.
I think that might be why there's these other terms like imposter phenomenon or the imposter experience, TMTM, that those might be there specifically to avoid using the word syndrome, which seems to imply something more clinical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a good point.
And for a lot of people, this most commonly happens when entering a new job, entering a new academic setting. It happens to a lot of students that are in a new academic environment, going to a new school or entering college or things like that. I feel like anecdotally, I've heard a lot of people report imposter syndrome sometimes when entering a new community or sometimes when taking on or discovering a new identity. Or, for instance, taking on a new type of relationship that sometimes people get that sense of, ooh, I'm not X enough, whether that's I'm not polyamorous enough, I'm not queer enough, I'm not geeky enough, or I'm not progressive enough, or whatever it is for this particular community or identity that I'm taking part in.
Yeah, definitely.
Totally.
I think that's important to note that even though a lot of the research is focused around academic settings and workplace settings, these things show up a ton in our interpersonal relationships in our communities. So just something to be aware. And of course, the researchers often work at universities and they do their studies on university students. So that's going to kind of be where they're looking, like that's where they're most acutely aware of this phenomenon. But it absolutely happens across the board in all sorts of situations. So now please join me in a little time machine. And we're going to go back to 1978, when the term imposter phenomenon was introduced in an article titled The Imposter Phenomenon in High-Achieving Women, Dynamics and Therapeutic Intervention by Pauline Clance and Suzanne Emes.
I just want to say that they initially, I guess it was thought initially from what I've read, that women only were the ones who experienced imposter syndrome. But then upon further research, they have found that it experiences basically across the board in everyone. But that's why their first, the first people that they looked at were all women for this, which is really interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. So in this particular article that they published, they defined imposter phenomenon as an individual experience of self-perceived intellectual phoniness, and that imposter syndrome may be accompanied by anxiety, stress, rumination, or depression. So again, they're looking at this in more of an academic setting there, which is why that intellectual phoniness, even though, as Dedeker pointed out, in more modern day, we're aware that it shows up in all sorts of places, like being not clear enough or progressive enough or whatever it is. And the researchers, they investigated the prevalence of this experience by interviewing a sample of 150 high-achieving women in the United States. All the participants had been formally recognized for their professional excellence by colleagues and had displayed academic achievement through degrees earned and standardized testing scores.
So despite this consistent evidence of external validation, the women who they looked at, they lacked the internal acknowledgement of their accomplishments. So they talked about how their success was a result of things like luck, or, other people maybe just were overestimating their intelligence or their abilities. And the two people who did this article, Clance and Imes, they believed that this mental framework for imposter phenomenon, it developed from factors such as things like gender stereotypes or early family dynamics, just a person's culture, things like that. And it also talked about, I looked at a different study that was also done by these people, and they talked about how two siblings might sort of be at odds with one another and their parents within like a family structure, because one sibling might be thought of as like the golden child, and the other sibling might also have high achievements in a different area. But if a parent perceives, one sibling as being more intelligent or more accomplished than the other, then that may bring on feelings of imposter syndrome in either sibling. Because if the one who is high achieving academically perhaps feels as though, oh, well, maybe I don't deserve this, then they might feel that imposter syndrome. Or if later on in life, the kid who achieved in something else didn't get that external validation from their parents, that might also bring on imposter syndrome. So it's interesting, like that's a way in which family of origin can sort of bring about these feelings of imposter syndrome.
Just get you coming and going, huh?
Yeah, seriously.
Wow.
And yes, I mean, again, they just determined that people felt also depression and generalized anxiety and low self-confidence. Those who experienced imposter syndrome also felt those things as well, this anxiety and low self-confidence, which is understandable.
So now we're going to hop back in our time machine and fast forward to 1985. So in 1985, that's the first time that we get an actual like research model, a scale to be able to measure these things. So the first scale that was designated to measure characteristics of imposter phenomenon was designed by Clance in 1985 and called appropriately the Clance Imposter Phenomenon Scale, or CIPS. The scale, SIPS, KIPS, whatever. So the scale was used to determine if characteristics of fear are present and to what extent. And the aspects of fear that they were looking at include fear of evaluation, fear of not continuing success, and fear of not being as capable as others. And I think even breaking it down that way is really, really interesting, because those are also these other particular flavors of imposter syndrome that seem like they could be going underneath the surface. So the scale was designed to measure the concept that individuals are successful by external standards, but have an illusion of personal incompetence. And the scale would assess components of the phenomenon, such as ideas about self-doubt and ideas about achieving success by chance.
And in that same paper in 1985, Clance explained that imposter syndrome has 6 dimensions to it. So the first of those is what she calls the imposter cycle. And essentially the way this cycle works is you have some kind of achievement-based task. So, doing well at a new job, being good in a relationship, writing a book, making a podcast, whatever it is. You have something that's achievement related. And then that leads you to have self-doubt and anxiety. I'm worried about this thing. And then as a result of worrying, you will either over-prepare or procrastinate, or potentially both, right? So because you're really just so scared of screwing this thing up. And then you do the thing, and generally speaking, it goes okay. It goes better than your fears were. almost all of the time, right? Because your fears are like the worst thing that could possibly happen. And so it does well. You feel a little bit of relief. People give you positive feedback, but then you discount it. You come up with some other reason for it. And in her particular model, she identified if you went the over preparation route, then your excuse is, well, I worked really hard on it. It's not actually that I'm good at it. And then if you went the procrastination route, people tend to attribute it to luck. I guess I got lucky, or I just happened to find the right thing to say, or something like that. So you discount that positive feedback, which then loops back around to feeling like you're a fraud, that you fooled people, you have depression and anxiety, and then you go on to your next task and it loops back around. So that's the imposter syndrome cycle. Mm. So that's the first of the 6 dimensions. The second one is the need to be special, or the need to be the best. The third one is the characteristics of what she calls the Superman or the Superwoman, which I think is that same idea of like, I should just be able to do everything. Like if I were actually good, I would be able to just show up and do it like Superman can, right? Then there's the fourth one is a fear of failure. The fifth is a denial of ability. Like we talked about, like, oh, it wasn't me, it was some other factor. And then the last part is feeling fear and guilt about any successes that you do have. And Clance noted that the characteristics may vary a little bit, but by her model, for an individual to be considered to experience imposterism, at least 2 out of the 6 have to be present. So that's a pretty low bar to clear.
2?
I'd say,
yeah, like I could, of them.
I could knock that out in like an hour.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just realizing that maybe the one area that none of us have imposter syndrome is on our ability to experience imposter syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
Because we all felt very confident. Like, yeah, man, I got this on lock. No problem.
Amazing and horrifying.
Maybe that's the secret sauce. Is that the secret ability that helps? Because at least you got something going for you, right?
I can do one thing well. Yeah.
All of you listeners out there, I'm really interested to hear which of you never experience imposter syndrome or experience it very minimally. And please tell us your secret. Just write us or write on our Instagram or something and tell us what your secret is. Thank you. I want to know.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Okay. So we want to go on to talk about how imposter syndrome shows up specifically in relationships and how it can manifest, what the effects can be, as well as some techniques and tools that we can use to try to combat imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon or the imposter experience, whatever you want to call it, imposterism. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick break to talk about some of the sponsors for this episode. We really appreciate all of our sponsors for helping to keep this show going, and we appreciate all of you for taking the time to listen and maybe check them out if any seem interesting to you.
All right, and we're back. So yeah, boy, oh boy, can imposter syndrome affect our relationships. This has definitely happened to me. I'm not sure if it has happened to all y'all out there. But what can this look like? It can look like things such as feeling like you're not good enough for your partner. Maybe you feel like I don't make enough money, so I don't have a job, or, some sort of way that will support us or support all of the things that we want to do, that my partner wants to do, eventually creating a family, stuff like that.
I think that what's interesting about how all those tie together there is that the way they tend to show up is someone thinking, well, I'm not something. And maybe that's a true thing that they're not. Like maybe I don't make a ton of money, or I don't have a ton of free time, or I'm not very sexual, or, whatever it is, there's something. And maybe there's some truth to that thing, but then it feeds into this loop of, well, because I might not be this, therefore someone can't love me. Yeah. And so if they do say they love me, I'm fooling them somehow, or they're just being nice, or they're lying, or I've tricked them into it, or I'm just working very hard and I'm not going to be able to maintain it, or all that stuff we talked about in the cycle before. That it's like whatever thing it is that for you is the thing you're insecure about tends to be the one that because of this, no one's going to be able to handle me. It's because I'm polyamorous, no one's going to be able to handle me. Or recently I've heard more and more people being like, because I'm monogamous, I feel like no one's going to love me.
Whoa, really?
There's all sorts of ways it can look. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think something else that comes up, and that's interesting in our millennial generation as well, is this idea that, like, I don't want to have kids because I don't think that I'll be a good parent, or I didn't have good role models.
That's 100% my thing.
Really? Yeah.
I mean, that's not the only reason that I'm choosing not to have kids, but that's definitely a place my mind has gone, is thinking that I think if I had kids, I would just not be a good parent, or wouldn't be a good enough parent. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, it's funny because I like to think that I'd be a really good parent, but I also don't have kids and have made the decision not to in my own life. But I can tell you with 100% certainty that if I did, that would be the area of the worst imposter syndrome in my whole life of
really
doing a bad job of raising a kid, for sure. Because it already comes up for me with like Dedeker's niece and nephew, or like with my godson. Like I get twinges of it. And I'm like, if I were the actual parent though, oh boy, that would be, that would be.
Like what kind of, what does that manifest as? I'm curious because I have no idea what that would look like.
Like this thing of second guessing anything that I ever say to them or do in front of them. Of
Am I
like,
going to screw this kid up?
I probably taught them a horrible thing. Yeah. Or seeing some little thing and being like, oh gosh, that's probably my fault that they thought that was okay to do. Or I should have better modeled for them not to do that. Or like, oh, this little thing happened. I think they hate me now. I think these kids hate me.
Well, already what happened? Okay, I think this is fresh in Jase's mind because we were just with my niece and nephew.
Okay,
we were visiting my family, and we were staying in an Airbnb separately. And we took my niece and nephew back to the Airbnb with us on separate nights, just to have like one-on-one time, essentially, so they could stay the night and we could have a sleepover. And
oh, fun!
Jase in bed at night turns to me and he's like, "Oh, dear sister and brother-in-law, do you think they hate us for taking their kids away?" And
you're like, they love us for taking their kids away.
Like,
are you kidding me?
A single parent that would hate someone for taking their kids away unless it was non-consensual. But I think we're in the clear.
That's amazing.
Gosh. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I also did go into the weekend worrying that Dedeker's niece didn't like me. And I came away feeling like, oh, actually, I thought we, got along really well. And maybe she's warmed up to me some.
Good.
And I'm sure I'll find a good excuse for why that was so that I can feel anxious about it in the future.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah, I feel like by the time you're seeing her again, you'll come back right back around and be like, oh, she probably hates me.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So moving back to relationships and not Jase's hangups, is some other ways this can show up in non-monogamy. Or really monogamy too, is this fear that, well, they're going to like someone else more than me. Like maybe they like me, but like I'm not good enough to, like, as soon as anyone else expresses interest, they'd have to go with that, right? Because basically anyone would be better than me. Or with non-monogamy, like my metamors are cooler, hotter, smarter than me. So maybe my partner's just with me because they were with me before. And like, if they had any choice, they wouldn't. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely felt this with Dedeker upon meeting her for the first time.
See, because I felt that about you when I met you for the first time, Emily.
Well, that's fine. Then we can just like cancel it out and know that we're both cool and smart and fun and play video games well and are nerdy enough.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then all of those underneath it is that idea that my partner deserves better than me. Like maybe even if I don't think my partner's going to go with someone else or they'll leave me for someone else, but that really like I'm holding them back somehow, that their life would be better if they had someone besides me.
I think another way this shows up in relationships is, I think sometimes this is at the root of not being able to accept compliments or other forms of love from your partner. I know the way that it's sometimes shown up in my life is if a partner says to me something really nice or really sweet or a big compliment, in my head, I'm like, oh, well, they're not in my head. They don't know the things that I've been thinking, or they didn't see me like how crappy I looked at this particular moment or whatever. And so they don't know what they're talking about. And hopefully they never find out, but they'll probably find out. And I probably don't deserve for them to say this nice thing to me. I think that
Well,
maybe we can make the
yeah.
case that some imposter syndrome is underneath, maybe one of the blocks that prevents us from being able to receive love open-heartedly.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. It's like the whole thing of not being able to receive a compliment just in general, not only in our relationships, but it's all related, right? It's all part of that same seed of, no, I didn't, this old thing, that kind of, no, you can't compliment me.
Yeah.
I'll fight you. Okay. So we've got this feeling, and how does it manifest? Like, how does this show up? What does this cause us to do? And some first things that come to mind is withdrawal or emotional unavailability. So it's like, well, they're going to find me out, so I should just stop, because then I can protect myself from getting hurt once I get found out, right? Comparison to others, like we were talking about, really beating yourself up over that. As we talked about, and as Clance defined in that cycle, that anxiety coming up to future tasks, future achievements, future relationships, that like, oh gosh, what if this one figures me out?
Mm-hmm. And of course, related to that, I think anxiety goes hand in hand with depression. Often, if there is this heavy internalized sense that I am deceiving everybody and I'm not worthy of this, that could be a very depressing thing. Of course, the low self-confidence, and I think kind of the very negative self-story attached to that can really grind you down. You could spend a lot of time agonizing or obsessing over your mistakes, and this is where they really get you. Because
who they?
Yes, because the people who developed imposter syndrome.
I see.
I think we developed it internally ourselves.
No.
They just defined it.
Imposter Experience Inc., who rolled out
the
imposter syndrome, thought it was going to be so great.
Yeah.
That's how they really get you, those fuckers. Because of the fact that as human beings, we all make mistakes all the freaking time, big ones and small ones, and especially in our relationships. We're constantly making little mistakes. We're constantly stepping on people's toes. We're constantly making choices that are maybe a little bit selfish or unintentionally hurting people. And if you already have a baseline of imposter syndrome, any mistake that you make just adds onto the pile, right? It's further evidence that I'm really not cut out for this and really shouldn't be doing this. And especially if you're someone who struggles with some hyper-functioning, over-perfectionistic tendencies, it's even worse.
You're talking about yourself?
Yes, I'm talking about myself.
This whole episode's about ourselves.
Sorry. Wow. Not only do we have imposter syndrome, we're really selfish, and
Gosh, no, yeah, boy.
On the flip side of this, you could also be constantly looking for approval from others. Looking for that sense of, can someone validate me? Can someone tell me that actually I'm okay? Can someone tell me that I'm competent? Can someone tell me that I deserve to be here? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I actually think that it could be a great thing to go to your friends, go to your loved ones, or go to your boss if they're a good boss or whatever, and find appropriate ways to get reassurance or to get a reality check. I think that's fine. But if it's something that you're finding yourself constantly relying on in order to avoid handling those feelings of imposter syndrome, that could be a problem.
When I perform, oh boy, is that a big one for me. I'm like, please tell me you love me. Please tell me I was good.
Oh.
Yeah. It's that chasing that high from the approval, but then immediately flipping back around to be like, but they must just not have been paying attention.
Exactly. And so then that's the other part of this, the way it shows up in behavior is there can be a complete lack of trust in other people. You can be doubting other people around you. I think that's where you get almost a little bit of this delusion of, oh, everyone's just being nice to me. And really, I was truly horrible. I really wanged that. And everyone is just trying to protect my feelings, or maybe they're laughing at me behind my back. It can really, really go into some weird places.
And lastly, it can show up as self-sabotage. And so this comes from that fear of kind of like withdrawing that we talked about before. It's like, I'm going to get hurt when someone realizes that I'm not good enough for them, or they finally find there's someone better. So I'm going to kind of make sure this crash and burns before that. So then I'm at least in control, right? That's that, like, maybe things are getting a little tough, or I see this show up when people go through a stressful event like losing their job or something like that, and it heightens some insecurities they may have already had about how worthy they are of their partner. And then in all that stress, they kind of tear it all down. They start being nasty. Maybe they start cheating. They like find other things that maybe are simultaneously trying to validate them in some areas while also kind of giving them an out from the one thing that they are really scared about, like that relationship that means a lot to them or something like that. So it can show up in all sorts of ways professionally as well, but that's how I've seen it play out and have experienced it play out in relationships.
Well, here is the ultimate question. Is this fixable? Should we try to fix it? Before we dive into what the research says about ways to combat this, I want to hear from the two of you. Have you tried to deal with imposter syndrome before? Have you tried any kind of hacks or tips or tricks, either adaptive or maladaptive, to deal with your own imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think sometimes time and talking yourself down a little bit does help. At least internally, that has helped for me. Like, I got a call from a friend that said that they were going to introduce me to a new agent potentially, and that was really exciting. But initially, once I got that call from him, like, oh, call this agent on this day, immediately I felt awful. I felt like you're totally not somebody who deserves this. You don't, have enough credits or enough whatever. You shouldn't be looking for this. You don't deserve this, essentially. And it took me like 2 days to really get over that internally in my brain and just sort of flip the switch and try to move in a direction of, okay, like, look at the things that you have done, be proud of your achievements, and move on from there. And however the chips fall, that's how it's going to be. And that's okay. And you don't have to like tell yourself that you suck at everything. But yeah, I think sometimes like getting away from the initial emotion is a good way to combat it. And that just like takes a little bit of time and self-soothing in whatever manner best works for you.
I have 2 examples. The first one, I'm not sure. I'm honestly not sure if this is a good plan or not. But the first one is something that I've been doing a lot since I started a new job maybe 5 months ago, something like that. And so I'm kind of gradually being given more responsibilities, but also kind of needing to prove myself to the more senior people in this position so that they can eventually sign off and say, yeah, Jase is, good enough that he can do this thing on his own, right? That he could do this presentation on his own without us having to, shadow him or something like that. And a technique that shows up there for me is trying to do stuff sooner. Like Tim Ferriss talks about this, of like setting unreasonable deadlines, of trying to fight
like
procrastination.
Book, you mean?
like our book, yes. But like setting a deadline of tomorrow, for example, for a project instead of a month from now. Because it's that idea of if you just are kind of forced to do it now, there's no room to procrastinate. And so you spend less time feeling anxious about the fact that you're procrastinating. But here's the part where I'm not sure if this is maladaptive or if this is a good plan, because it also gives me a little bit of a mental excuse for if I do feel like something didn't go well. It's like, well, I was the one who signed up for the first slot. I didn't have as much time. And if I did have more time, I probably could have done better. And so it's like, I don't know if that's just making excuses, but it does help for me at least to take a little bit of that edge off of, oh my gosh, I prepared for this thing for a month and I still feel like I didn't do as well. That kind of helped. So that's one. And then the second one, this came up with a therapist that I had years and years ago who would do EFT tapping, emotional freedom technique tapping, while also doing the counseling coaching kind of stuff. And this would come up a lot when I would do music performances. And I'd say something like, I felt like everyone there just like could not wait for my set to be done because it was just awful and they didn't like it. And I was just kind of wasting their time by being there. And she would, tap, 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 tap. Did anyone say that to you? Oh, like what kind of evidence do you have that was the case? Did you see anyone making faces like that? Kind of like gently asking those questions of, do you actually have any evidence? And then asking the other question of, do you have any evidence to the contrary? Of, did anyone say it was good? Did anyone seem to be enjoying themselves? And kind of looking at that, and just, it never got me to the point of going, yeah, you're right, people loved it. But it got me to this point of, okay, I don't know. Maybe I don't know anything. And that was better than where I was before. So
I'm going to put myself down in a different way.
Right. I guess for myself, when I really sit and think about it, I think the way that I've coped. I don't know if this is healthy or unhealthy, but usually it's like, this just means I need to work harder. Means I just need to study harder. I need to learn more things. I need to become more competent. If I'm feeling less confident, less competent or less confident, I just need to do the things to make myself get there. And I think it's good on the one hand because it can be motivating for me to learn new things and to branch out and acquire more skills. But then on the other hand, that doesn't actually tend to help in the long run.
It's not actually solving the problem.
Yeah, it doesn't really solve the problem. So we have a list here of some things to try. I think this seems like the kind of thing where I think everybody's imposter experience is slightly different. It's gonna sprout based on different insecurities, different contexts that you come from, different background. And so I don't know if all of these tools are necessarily one size fits all, but these are some things that you can try on and just see if it helps to shift it even a little bit. So the first one is to make a list of 10 things that do make you qualified for the job or for the relationship or for success in general, however you define that.
The next one is positive affirmations. So we've talked about that somewhat on the show. Something that the article that I got these from, which was from New York Times, talked about is that research has shown that adding your name to the affirmation makes the affirmation even more effective. And it's something that like high achievers and people like that do. They'll say like, LeBron James, this is best for LeBron James. Like they used him as an example, which is interesting. I don't know. I wonder if that is almost separating yourself from the feeling or putting it together more. I'm not sure.
Maybe.
Or maybe kind of tricking yourself into, this is a thought that came from externally.
Yeah.
That this came from an external source. So they're talking about me in third person. I wonder.
Yeah. I don't know.
Interesting.
But adding your name is a good thing for a positive affirmation. Like, Karen is worthy or Jase is loved by people, things like that.
Gosh. Yeah. Emily is loved by agents.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But that's good. That's actually a really good one to practice, though, because I think that's something that has come up for me in some workshops and things I've done is when you stumble on something like that feels really uncomfortable, there's something there, right? If it's that, Jase is loved by his godson or something like that, and it like feels like that freaks me out a little bit to say it, that's a good one. That's a good one to focus on and get yourself more comfortable with it. Another one is just taking the compliment, just avoiding that tendency to make excuses. And we've talked before on our episode about microscripts, of the microscript of why thank you as sort of a go-to response when someone gives you some kind of compliment or a partner says something nice to you is why thank you, instead of, oh no, I look terrible, my hair is all greasy today, or whatever else you might be inclined to say.
My partner said to me the other day, he's like, I just wish you would let me give you a compliment. And I looked at him and I was like, why, thank you. I'm sorry. Because, he was trying to give me a compliment and I totally was like, no, I don't. I'm not. La, la, la. So I had to thank you myself.
Normally I'm a lot better about this, but because I'm in the throes of a breakup, it's been real hard for me to take compliments from Jase. Real hard. I'm sorry about that. Something else that you can do is you can visualize success or what success looks like. I think this is something that gets covered a lot in the sports psychology world about athletes and other high achievers visualizing a successful move or a successful play. Often it's related to physical things. I think that something that might be helpful here, because like I talked about at the beginning of the episode, part of the reason that I think my imposter syndrome comes up is because I've visualized a version of my own success where I visualize myself feeling much more confident or feeling differently. And I wonder if more helpful visualization might include, I'm successful and it feels a little scary and a little shaky, but I'm still successful in this way. That maybe there might be something there.
I like that. Yeah. Also, you can talk to a colleague or a friend or a mentor or someone who cares about you, but also is someone who's going to tell it to you straight about how awesome you are, about how high achieving you are, about all of the things that you do well in your life. And, hopefully someone that you trust, that you're like, well, this isn't just my mom who's going to tell me that I'm the most amazing person, but, somebody whose opinion you value and trust. Not that I don't value and trust your opinion, Mom, because I most certainly do. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah. So another one here that came from this New York Times article is about work on your confidence. And it says specifically, try to speak up, raise your hand, or volunteer. Fake it till you make it is kind of the idea there. And it's funny because I read this and I kind of thought about that idea of setting unreasonable deadlines or being the first to do something, of kind of that, I'm going to just get this done and get it over with so that I'm spending less time feeling anxious about it. And hopefully also get kind of that feeling of, okay, I did it. And maybe after you've done things enough times, you might start to believe that you can do that thing. At least that has been my experience. And I have found that in certain areas where I do feel more confident, like about being able to give a demo or a presentation explaining something, that is something I feel relatively confident about, even though I'll still have imposter syndrome. But it's also something that I'm usually the first one to be like, okay, yeah, I'll do this thing. Sure, I'll sign up to take the first slot to do that. Okay, yeah, I'll do those. And you have that evidence for yourself about, oh yeah, I've done this, so I know I can do it again.
Yeah, definitely. Something that I love creating the stash. That's what I call it. I've talked about it on the show before, but it's this idea of create a folder on your computer, in your phone, or you could do old-fashioned hard copy style of having a journal or a physical folder, but just keep track of nice things that people say to you, praise that people give to you or have written about you, really wonderful, loving, complimentary things that your partner says to you. And it can be really good to have that and to reference that just as a little pick-me-up, or when you're feeling the imposter syndrome creeping in, to have those around as reminders. I really, really love this technique.
Just to throw this out there, I really appreciate any of our listeners who do write in or comment to us about things from the show that have been meaningful to you or have been helpful. We will often... Yep. It makes me cry often, but we will often send those to each other when someone's kind of feeling down or struggling more. It'll be like, hey, Emily, I just saw this comment that someone said about the episode that you planned, or this thing you said on an episode, check it out. You're great. See, even other people get it. So we really
and then I call those other people a liar also, and I throw it in the garbage. No, I'm kidding. And no, we really appreciate it. Definitely.
It is helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. And finally, another thing that you can do is just communicate with the people around you, and especially your partner if it's specific to something in your relationship that's causing feelings of imposter syndrome. Maybe you need to examine and look at, is there something internally that's going on that I feel like I'm lacking in this relationship, or that I feel like I could be getting more of? And that can manifest in a lot of different ways, but through communication with your partner, maybe you can identify that. Maybe you can look and develop strategies or some sort of thing that will help with that feeling of imposter syndrome. Okay, I'm worried that my partner is going to leave me for another person. Maybe it's just that I want to have more quality time with this person, want to go on more one-on-one dates, want to, feel loved and appreciated and reminded of that.
I want to give us one last little bonus one, that this is something that Emily and I were actually just talking about earlier today. And that is, I saw this somewhere once on Twitter or Instagram or somewhere a couple of years ago, but it was this idea of, instead of feeling imposter syndrome, to instead think, I'm the greatest con artist that's ever lived. And just really be like, maybe I am fooling everyone, but I can be proud of that instead of ashamed and afraid of it. It's like, that's kind of fun. I like that.
Yeah, I really like that. That's excellent. And a nice way to reframe everything and make it into a positive as opposed to a negative. Yeah. Alrighty, everyone. Well, that was fun. We took a deep dive into imposter syndrome. I hope that all y'all out there learned a little something and maybe just, realized that these three chuckleheads on this podcast that you listen to every week also feel imposter syndrome very intensely, and that you're not alone in feeling that way if you yourself feel it. So we are going to go on and record a bonus episode for our patrons. We are going to actually use the Clance IP scale, the imposter syndrome test, on ourselves and determine how imposter syndrome-y we are. What is it called?
Who's the best imposter?
Yeah, there it is. I love that. It's a contest. Who's the best imposter? I think it's going to be a tight race between the three of us, quite frankly. Yes. Alrighty. We would like to know from you on our Instagram this week, how does imposter syndrome show up in your life? We told you all the ways that it shows up in our life. Now you get to tell us how it shows up in your life. The best place to share your thoughts with other listeners is on this episode's discussion thread in our private Facebook group or Discord chat. You can get access to these groups and join our exclusive community by going to patreon.com/multiamory. In addition, you can share with us publicly on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Multiamory is created and produced by Jase, Lindgren, Dedeker, Winston, and me, Emily Matlack. Our episodes are edited by Mauricio Balvanera. Our social media wizard is Will McMillan. Our production assistants are Rachel Shenowork and Carson Collins. Our theme song is Forms I Know I Did by Josh and Anand from the Fractal Cave EP. The full transcript is available on this episode's page on multiamory.com.